You're on the road beyond. I'm Todd Duplantis. Welcome. We're on a special night at 7 o'clock time for those in the Central Time Zone. Thanks for being here tonight. For our audience on Facebook Live and YouTube, welcome to the show. Got a special show for you tonight. Pete, the producer's out sick, but we've got a couple of guests joining me. Of course, one of them, he's always here. Ike McFadden joining us from the great state of Tennessee. How's it going, Ike?
It's pretty good. The weather is I think we're getting a bit of the hurricane side effect.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a second. That hurricane's really did a number on Louisiana, and now it's moving up towards the Tennessee River Valley. So it's headed up to that way, so you'll get dumped on. Filling in for Pete, the producer, we've got Nathan, the director, joining us. Nathan Hale, welcome to the show. Okay, his mic is not registering, so we'll welcome Nathan to the show. Just know that he's the one behind the controls, so he really kind of runs the show.
He's here in spirit.
He's here in spirit. Okay. All right, so hurricanes, we want to talk a bit about those, and I did a little research. We all know we're in the height of hurricane season right now, but it's kind of eerie, Ike. And I don't know if you looked at some of the dates I sent across in the script, looking at the hurricanes, especially the major ones that have hit in the last few decades. They've happened either on the same date, within a couple of days, or literally within a couple of weeks.
Well, it would be interesting to know, statistically, given that hurricane season is a very specific window, I guess there is some reason that they would tend to hit on the same dates over the course of years, but it'd be interesting to get a real math person to look at that.
Well, you look at it this way. Hurricane season technically begins, I know here in Texas, the beginning of June, and it stretches all the way to the end of October, early November. Now, you may have random hurricanes like we did last year, which may strike out of that time, but mainly it's within that time. But if you look at the devastating ones, that's when things get really heated up in the Gulf of Mexico. These hurricanes start off in Africa. They make their way across the Atlantic Ocean. Boy, but when they hit what scared me the most about Ida, and I'm sure you've seen this in the news, last week at this time, we weren't talking about Ida. We were talking about some disturbance, something that looked favorable. That thing turned into a tropical storm, and within 48 hours, you were looking at almost a Cat 5 hurricane about to make landfall in Louisiana.
Well, and here's a little tidbit for you. I didn't know this until relatively recently. Did you know that there are hurricanes in the Mediterranean, and they're called metacanes?
No, did not. Metacanes.
I don't think we here who live in the U.S., we wouldn't really think they're much of a hurricane. They're more like just sort of a bad storm, but technically they are. And they come off of North Africa as well. And because the whole Mediterranean is so warm, they tend to bring a lot of moisture and dump it all along the Mediterranean coast, which is usually pretty dry. So it causes a lot of mudslides and so forth.
Do they have the power of the hurricanes here?
No.
Because you look at the ones in Asia that hit Asia, they're usually tropical cyclones is what they call them over there. Those things can get up to 200 miles an hour, and it's not unusual for them to hit at 180 miles an hour.
Now, do you remember when was it a tsunami or a hurricane that hit the Japanese Fukuyama power plant?
That was a tsunami. Yeah, that was a tsunami that hit that, but that causes devastating damage. We don't really have to worry about those here in Texas and Louisiana and along the Gulf Coast. But looking at Ida, Ida came ashore yesterday, just southwest of New Orleans. I think Port Fourchon was where it actually went in ashore. Almost a Category 5. I think winds around 154 when it was hitting. Just horrible damage it did to the Louisiana area. A year ago, almost to the day, on the 27th of August, they had Hurricane Laura, if you remember, in 2020. And the big problem we faced back then, as they're dealing with now, but it was more prevalent back then, was the fact that you not only had a major hurricane, which left parts of Lake Charles in that area just devastated for months, if not still recovering, but you also were in the middle of a pandemic. We weren't really letting people out from lockdown yet. This time around, you got somewhat of that, but a more powerful one that's hit an area which had more people.
let me switch gears a little bit here. I was reading about, have you ever heard of the Gray Man?
Can't say I have.
Okay.
Is it like Slender Man? Shadow figure?
I guess it might be. Here's a little tidbit for you. In South Carolina ghost lore, the Gray Man is a ghost reportedly seen on the coast of Pawleys Island, which is a little island off the coast of South Carolina, obviously, that allegedly warns residents of coming severe storms and hurricanes. And
Oh, wow.
yes, so this has apparently been going on. He was first seen in 1822, which was actually 3 years before the town government was even incorporated. And it was last allegedly seen, Hurricane Florence in 2018. Now, the background is allegedly the Gray Man is this ghost of a young man traveling from Charleston to see his fiancée. And on the way, he got caught in some quicksand and died in the marshes of Pawleys Island. But apparently, he still haunts the shore nearby. He's apparently looking for his long-lost girl, or maybe his long-lost horse. And apparently he's well known. There have been books published about him, and there was even an episode of Unsolved Mysteries that was talking about him. So does Texas have any kind of, is there a Gray Man, or is there anything that you're supposed to see before a hurricane?
Well, I'm wondering, Gray Man kind of ties in with the whole Mothman myth.
Oh, okay.
That's a harbinger of bad things to come. It could be one of the trickster spirits that, you hear about these. We covered them extensively on the show. But Gray Man, Mothman, maybe one of the same.
As we both lived in Florida some time ago, and I remember there was this one, I believe it was 2005 or so, there was this one summer where about 3 hurricanes hit in the space of a couple of months. And at the time, I was living in a house, as you do, and I remember I had this neighbor who was sort of a old Florida redneck cracker guy who was always hunting in the swamps and so forth. He grew up in Florida, really great guy, and he really knew all these interesting little tidbits. But I remember one day we were out there and we were kind of wondering, is this hurricane, whatever it was, is it going to hit here? Is it going to be 200 miles north? Is it going to miss the state entirely? And he said, Ike, come here, come over to this tree. So I walk over to the tree and he says, look at the tree. I said, okay, what am I looking at? He said, look closely at the bark. And I looked at it, and there were all these ants swarming up the tree.
They know what's going on, yeah.
That's what he said. He said, that's how you know it's going to hit here.
Yeah, they know before we do. And I've heard that. I mean, of course, the locals know these things, but going back to the dates of the hurricanes, it is eerily similar. Ida, 8/29, okay, that hit yesterday. Laura hit 8/27 of, so August the 27th of 2020. Harvey, big hurricane. That one meandered about, but really started dumping several feet of rain on the Houston area. I was here when all that happened. That hit affected Texas and Louisiana on the 27th of August as well. Okay. Go back to the storm with your moniker, Ike, Hurricane Ike back in 2008. That hit on September the 11th here in Texas. Primarily, it went across, came into Houston. I think it was downgraded to a Cat 2 when it hit Houston, but still devastating damage. And then if we go back further, let's go back to the other monumental hurricane for the New Orleans area, Katrina. That was on the 28th of August. Okay. 1 day difference here than Hurricane Ida. That hit New Orleans. And of course, I was still in news then. I was working for the local Fox affiliate, and we were one of the only crews covering Katrina during the event when it happened. And we were actually doing live shots for Fox News as well. One thing that happened during Katrina, I'll never forget this. We were stationed in Baton Rouge the night it rolled in, and then they were sending us into the city to report. We didn't know how bad it was going to be. On the public radio stations there, people were calling in after the alleged hurricane had hit, saying, the news overhyped this. It was no big deal. What are they talking about? Because the storm itself, as it came through, wasn't a big deal. If you remember what happened in New Orleans, what made it devastating is that the levees were broken at the time. They failed. And that's what flooded the city. New Orleans is a bowl protected by levees. One of them was breached. And that was it. Flooded the Ninth Ward, was devastating for the city. But that's really what got Katrina on the map with New Orleans, was the fact that the levees broke. They held this time around. This one, though, had, 120 miles an hour winds that were hitting New Orleans, battering it yesterday. And that's really what caused the problem right now.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because as you were talking, I was looking up, there was the Great Labor Day hurricane in Florida back in 1935. That formed August 29th, 1935. And that was, from what I've read, I think it's still amongst the strongest ever to make landfall, certainly on the East Coast. And I don't know if you recall being around West Palm Beach, but they're near downtown.
Yep.
There are several very large parks. And I always thought, oh, isn't that nice? There's a nice park here. It wasn't until years later, reading up on it, that I realized that those were actually the sites of mass graves.
Yeah. It's amazing, and that happened because that 1935 hurricane went through West Palm Beach I believe, as well, right?
Yeah, well, all of South Florida. I think it mainly kind of hit the Keys, but it certainly hit West Palm.
Right.
And this is mentioning the levees. One of the reasons it was so deadly was the storm surge. Now, the storm surge is that part of, for people who don't know, a hurricane sort of acts like a vacuum cleaner, sort of sucking some of the water up on the surface of the ocean. And then as it moves ashore, that batch of water just sloshes ashore.
Yeah.
And allegedly the storm surge for the Labor Day hurricane was up to 20 feet high. And it actually swept literally across the Keys from one side to the other. And if you've ever seen, I think it went as far inland, not in the Keys, but to Lake Okeechobee, which is something like 150 miles inland. That's a huge storm surge.
Right. Well, it was something yesterday. Ida had actually reversed the course of the Mississippi River at the mouth. And
I heard that. Has that ever happened before?
I don't know. I don't think Katrina did. I don't think Katrina was that powerful. As I mentioned, Katrina was the flooding event for New Orleans. Ida yesterday was the devastating winds and the Cat 4 winds as they went ashore. Going further back into the Texas-Louisiana hurricane history, Alicia, 1983. It happened on the 18th of August. That one was a weird hurricane because that one came right through Galveston. I believe it went up the ship channel. It went through downtown Houston and literally took out about half of the windows and all the skyscrapers they had at that time. That was Hurricane Alicia. If you want to go further back, when I lived in New Orleans, I was born and raised there, a couple of the hurricanes they always talked about, one was Camille. And Camille was something because it was known for a few things. It was an extremely powerful hurricane, but it was one that had a precursor called Betsy a few years before, which happened in September of 1965. The thing about those hurricanes, that's when people in New Orleans during those times, and you heard this yesterday if you watched the news, people in New Orleans started keeping axes and saws in their attics. And the reason they did that is the same reason why people nowadays, and you probably saw them on the news yesterday, there were some couples reporting from their attics because that's all they could climb into as the water rose so fast. And so what the generation of my parents learned, and they had this in their homes, you would keep axes in your attics in case the water rose and you had to climb in the attic, you wanted to be able to get out and have somebody save you.
Well, I keep an axe in my attic for totally different reasons. We'll leave that aside for a moment. All right, here's a little, it's like we're the Weather Channel tonight. Here's a little bit of trivia. Do you know back before they had satellites, which was, I think they invented the satellite late last fall. But before that, do you know how they would have an idea of where the hurricane was going to hit?
Didn't they put their finger in their mouth, get it wet and hold it up in the wind?
Probably some people did that, but the slightly more technical version was they would count waves. They would count waves over the course of, say, a minute. And the reason this works is they would kind of go up and down the coast. And so if they were up in the north and they'd get whatever 5 waves hitting the shore per minute, they'd be like, okay, then we'll go down south. 10 waves per minute here, and then go down further south, it's 5 waves per minute again. So they'd be like, okay, it's that area right there. That's roughly where it's going to hit.
Who gets that job? I want to know who gets that job. Who's the one? Okay, all right, you're going out and counting waves tonight. We're going to send you to the northern part of the county. You're going to count waves in the southern part, and then we're all going to meet back here at 10 o'clock and compare our notes. Then we're going to release a statement, let people know. By that time, the hurricane is here.
Apparently, no. Apparently, this worked several days in advance, although I would guess probably no one knew. They're just, I'm here to count waves. And it's not till you get back there, you're like, oh, I was in the middle of it.
One thing we cannot forget, and we talked about it on this show several times with ghost experts, because it left its mark on the city. The 1900 hurricane, which devastated Galveston, Texas, thousands of people died, tens of thousands homeless. And it made an everlasting mark on the island. I mean, it devastated the coastal area of Galveston. Galveston is on an island. Because of that hurricane, they built the seawall, which protects them from hurricanes. Now there's discussion, and really after Ida came through, there's discussion of building a barrier which closes and opens across an area before you get to the ship channel. And the reason being is because it's protecting it would protect all the interests in the ship channel. I mean, we've got not just cargo, but all the refineries that produce oil and refine oil into gasoline for a good section of this nation, if not part of the world. So there's talk about this dam they're going to build, and it would be one that would open and close, and it would be a divider that would actually help save the island. That's the next step. If that happens, and I actually interviewed one of the men who was part of the plan in designing that a few years ago, that would be monumental as well, because that would add on more protection, protecting the energy of this country. It's something that we're probably going to get after Ida, because we still don't know how this is going to affect oil and gas prices. I'm hearing 5 to 10 cents is a low estimate at how much a gallon of oil, a gallon of gas is going to go up in the next week or so.
Do you know? So I was looking at.
Hear more on it.
I was looking at that myself, and I was curious. Do you know why it's taken that long? I would think the gas prices would go up more quickly than that. Because
they have to estimate the damage. Right now, what I heard is they've got to go out and look at the platforms that were out there and that may be inoperable or repairable, or what their damage estimates are. And once they get that, then they are able to make an idea. Once they get those forecasts back, then they decide how much this is going to affect our oil and gas delivery across this nation.
Well, it's not, as far as I know, it's not just oil and gas, isn't it? I mean, it's all kinds of petrochemicals. It's plastics.
All types of petrochemicals. We do a lot of that refining here in Houston. And people think, well, we live in Houston. We refine most of the gas for the country. So, we should be okay. But the oil's got to come from somewhere. And those rigs out in the Gulf of Mexico, they produce a lot of it.
Do you know, now this is a little curious question I was thinking as you were talking, has an oil rig ever been damaged severely by a hurricane?
I'm sure they have. I don't know if they've been totally taken out. Maybe we have some oil experts watching the show, but I know they can sustain damage that can maybe be repaired, but they can be taken out for the time being. I don't know if they've been totally decimated, because you'd think that they would be prepared when building these rigs for Cat 5 storms.
A totally different aside, but I was watching, did you ever see, there was a TV series called Mars, and it was fairly recently. I think Elon Musk co-produced it, and it was a combination of a drama about humans going to Mars and the
I heard about that.
Yeah, it was on National Geographic, and it was also part documentary. And one of the interesting things that went on in that documentary, to me that was interesting, was a lot of it was showing North Atlantic and Arctic oil rigs, and they were talking about how these were these self-contained environments where you had to bring in all the supplies, and essentially why this kind of work was preparing people to travel to other planets.
Well, you got to think of it this way. Okay, that's a good analysis, because these rigs may be totally prepared for the Cat 5 storms, but you still got to get the people off of them. So you evacuate the people from the rigs, You bring them back for the storm. That disrupts the oil chain of the chain of delivery, and then you have to bring them back and get it fully operational and check all your systems. You may have something down, something that needs repair. So that might be really what's going to disrupt the chain. But we know one, and they're already saying one way or another, the chain of oil delivery is going to be disrupted by Ida. We just don't know how much yet.
So according to Nathan, he says, according to government data, Katrina destroyed 46 oil platforms and damaged 100 pipelines in August of 2005. That's interesting because I don't.
And you know what happened after that? If you remember, gasoline went up to $4 a gallon and was over $4 a gallon here in Houston.
Really? No, it's so funny, the things you pay attention to and the things you don't. Like, another weird aside, but there are a lot of, shall we say, things that seem a little odd in the world these days. You know, we've got a pandemic. We've just got a lot of oddness going on. And I've wondered, and you tell me what you think, but I've wondered, have things changed, or am I just paying attention more now? Or was the government, let's say, with the best of intentions, not great at their job all the time? And, was it always like that, or do we just know about it more nowadays, or what do you make of all that?
I think we know about it a lot more nowadays than we ever have. Information is instantaneous. Before, when I was going covering Hurricane Katrina for Fox, we were one of the only crews for the Fox network inside of New Orleans when everything went to hell. I mean, the water started rising, people started shooting each other. You had a lot of issues going on inside the city, tragic things happening because the water levels were rising. And you wouldn't have known about that back in those days because social media was really 2005, very much in infancy, very much. I think Twitter may have been getting off the ground back then, but nobody really knew about it. The internet was around, but you didn't get instantaneous information. So I think that plays a role in us knowing when the government isn't doing what they need to be doing. We get live pictures from Afghanistan that tell us the truth nowadays, and it's not coming through, your news channels. It's coming from people who are shooting the video, uploading it to Facebook or Twitter or YouTube.
And I agree with all that. What do you make of, what kind of long-term consequences are there going to be with that? The idea that it's sort of, my impression is it seems like, until relatively recently, there was a reasonable national or international consensus of what was going on in the world and why, and what the narrative was and what the steps were and what the likely outcome was. And we had 3 channels and a handful of newspapers. And it sort of seemed like people were more or less, at least within a country, sort of on the same page. And yet that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. And I wonder about things like social stability. I mean, is a democracy really, can you sustain it?
One thing, and you may have noticed this in Nathan may have noticed this, when you're looking at social media nowadays, whether it was the previous administration or the current administration, people are wanting to hold someone responsible, no matter what. Someone gets killed. Well, you got to go out and find the person and take care of that. A hurricane happens. Well, it's somebody's fault that all these, and I think we've gotten there through social media, instantaneous information. It gives us all this information. We have information overload. You see tragic things happen and you're wondering, why the hell isn't someone being held accountable? Someone needs to pay for it. In reality, in life, that doesn't always happen.
Well, and that brings an interesting point about traditionally, historically, you've had the idea of the scapegoat, and that was a physical, at one point, a goat.
Yeah.
That people would sort of cast their worries and their sins upon and then run it out of town. Or same with burning things in effigy. Putting
people on a donkey with a dunce hat backwards, tying their hands up and sending them around back, off into the desert.
Yeah. So it makes me wonder, that seems to have a real social role or a real psychological role for a community. And what happens, as you say, when that stuff stops working, or you can tell people are still searching for it, but it doesn't seem like the system is connecting anymore.
Yeah, no, it doesn't, and
searching for it, but it doesn't seem.
Whoop, sorry, there we go. Actually, was sharing our YouTube channel.
Well, what do you make of that? I mean, that seems to me, it seems, maybe I'm just getting older, but it sort of seems dangerous.
I think it is dangerous, but then again, it's the cost we're paying for instant information. We're looking for solutions when really there aren't solutions in a lot of these cases. Could anyone, and it kind of gets me, it brings me to, in this, I don't want to go into climate change. I don't want to go into it, but I'll throw some.
Go into it. That's fine.
I don't want to go into it because I have my own feelings towards that. But is the climate changing? Yes. If we give money to Europe, is that going to help things? There's all people are looking for answers, and this goes to Ida. You're going to hear people, climate change. Here we go, climate change again. Could it be that we're just getting more powerful hurricanes because Earth goes through normal changes throughout reality? I always go back to the George Carlin skit he did on climate change, where at the end he said, you know what? One of these days, the Earth is going to shake us off like a bad case of fleas. It was around before we got here. It's going to be around after we're gone, and to sum up, not exactly what he said, but pretty close to it. I kind of have that attitude.
Yeah, I always kind of go back to things about stories and mythology, and there's something about whether it's COVID or climate change or even UFOs, there's sort of an apocalyptic, we have angered the volcano god and we must sort of story in there. There's, kind of whatever you think of the science of the matter, there are clearly some people who, in terms of a pandemic, look like, well, they might as well just wear garlic around their necks. They're that close to being like, let me do something.
Well, there are people that are thinking if you get a vaccine for COVID, they're putting, nanotechnology in you so they can track you. There are people thinking that's being thought of right now.
Well, okay, here's on that topic. I've got, as you know, I've got friends all over the world and I talk to them pretty regularly. And I've got one friend who's in South America, and he's a very bright guy about most things. And somehow the topic of it, he says, well, they make you magnetic. I was like, well, I've heard that, and I don't see what the mechanism for that would be really. He said,
right.
And he said, well, I didn't either, but then I went over to my friend's house and he was like, sticking whatever paper clips all over his body. And I was like, well, and so I hear something like that, and I assume this fellow's not lying to me. And so it makes you wonder, people do have these anomalous experiences, and that's a lot of what we talk about, is sort of the difference between anomalous experiences that do appear to happen, but that you're not entirely sure, well, what to make of that.
We don't know what to make of it, though. We really don't. But we're not going to solve all the world's problems tonight. And, our one thing I do want to get across before we leave the subject of hurricanes, I want to get to the news because I promoted this picture of Bigfoot we're going to show in a second. I do want to say that our hearts and prayers go out to the people in Louisiana who have been hit by the storm. We stand with you in Texas. We know what you're going through, and our prayers go out to your recovery efforts in Louisiana. And, Ike, the storm's not done. I know it's headed your way as well. And it'll be going all the way up through the Tennessee Valley and into heading up to the East Coast as well.
Oh, I've got an idea. Maybe next show we could do like a fundraiser for axes in attics. That's actually
Axes in Attics.
That's
a big
good
deal in
t-shirt.
New Orleans.
Axes in Attic. That'd be a good name for a band. Do they still have bands? Do people still make music?
Yeah, they still make music, but nobody listens to it.
Okay. Oh, before we leave this subject, did you see there was, I believe Eric Clapton came out with a song the other day, a single called, what was it? Enough is Enough or something like that?
He's done a couple of singles, apparently, criticizing the lockdown and the vaccines and all that. I don't know what happened to Eric Clapton. He used to be, he's always been a rebel, but him and Van Morrison, they've been teaming up, and I don't know. They got some crazy stuff going on nowadays. But yeah, Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that this has been such a global phenomenon that you have 60s icons coming out and putting out to give us their opinion on vinyl or on MP3 or whatever it is. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead with where
Nathan is saying that garage bands are dead. And now there's things called attic bands. Attic bands are the thing. So there you go. Hey, folks, here's a look at some of the weird, tantalizing, and just plain bizarre stories posted from our partners at the Full Spectrum Project on Facebook. Follow them. They post some incredible stories. Ike, do you have something you want to talk about first?
I already ran through my stuff.
Okay, you ran through yours. Okay. I'm going to go to Lon Strickler's phantomsinmonsters.com website. They recently posted an article, and I don't know if you saw these pictures, but they're pretty fascinating. Idaho Bigfoot story. Apparently, there was a video shot recently in Idaho. Lon Strickler got a hold of it, posted the video, but grabbed some still images from it. Some of the most tantalizing pictures of Bigfoot I've ever seen. Did you look at the pictures?
I did. They sort of, to be cynical, they sort of look like, standard blurry Bigfoot photo.
Standard blurry. Okay, come on. It's a little bit better than blurry. You see a pretty darn good image of what looks to be like an ape-like creature kind of walking. And what gets me, Ike, is this does not appear to be a guy in a suit. Usually you can tell Bigfoot guys in Bigfoot suits who really are just out trying to get shot by hunters. This looks pretty darn good because you can see things like you could normally see with that Gimlin-Patterson film, which was made famous back in the 60s. This one looks like muscle structure, you can see. So if it's a suit, it's a pretty good suit. And it looks like a fairly large creature. And really, I know you make fun of the blurry images, but this is probably one of the better images I've ever seen.
Well, to go back to the Patterson thing, one of the more interesting analyses of that I saw was, did you ever see that biomechanical study of it?
Yes, which was pretty convincing.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, okay, well, that's, I'll give that a little bit of leeway. Shouldn't we find Bigfoot eggs or something on occasion?
Well,
however they reproduce.
We've talked to experts about this. Ken Gerhard, has been on the show, and it makes a lot of sense. People are like, why have we found a dead Bigfoot or Bigfoot bones or a Bigfoot skeleton? His idea is, if you're walking through the woods, okay, do you find deer skeletons everywhere? Not that often.
Well, no, but I have seen deer antler on someone's wall before.
Okay, they shot the deer. Okay, but if these creatures are burying their dead, like they say they're doing, it's his theory. And if there's just a few, maybe 1,000 or 2 of them around the country, that's not a whole lot to spread out across the country. They're pretty. So they bury their dead. They keep hidden. But this picture is a pretty good picture. I mean, it's fairly clear. If he zoomed in on some tantalizing pictures and images where you can see muscle structure in an arm, you can see a head, you can see what appears to be some type of ape-like structure or face, and then you can see something around the eyes, which looks like an ape. I mean, it looks like an ape standing up.
Well, I forget who we were talking to a week or so ago, but we were talking about the ways that, or the idea that things can manifest from people's psyche or collective psyche.
Right. Yeah.
And, the thing is, I don't even know how you would prove that. How would you prove something like that? I mean, it's because I think it's very plausible that somehow humans have this idea of our ancestors or things that we used to run across when we were co-evolving with other ape things, and that somehow people still have that in their dreams or in their psyche or their subconscious. And it's all a nice theory, but how would you make heads or tails of that?
Well, I mean, I've heard that experiment being done before where you've had a group that manifests a entity, a ghost, a spirit. I don't know how you'd manifest a physical thing. That still doesn't really get me. I can understand the ghost. I'll go for a spirit, an entity, poltergeist. Sure, you do bad things, you want to worship Satan, you're going to get stuff like that. But to manifest a Bigfoot, I don't see that happening.
Well, bear in mind, there's a difference between manifesting a Bigfoot and manifesting a photo of a Bigfoot.
Well, there you go. So,
no, I'm being serious.
Photoshop does a lot of things these days.
Well, but
right?
even let's say, all right, let's be getting very woo here. Let's say you did manifest something in your psychology or something. Again, it's one thing to manifest it on a piece of photo paper or whatever the kids use these days, and it actually being observable by other people outside your own head. I don't know that any of that's terribly likely, but I guess.
Possibly. Well, if you got a chance to see the Bigfoot images in the show, if you want to go see them, we'll put a link in the social media post for the show when we get that. We're doing the show tonight because tomorrow Ike leaves for Athens, which means we're going to have some changes for the show. We're going to take about 3 weeks off, let him get situated overseas, and then we'll be back on Tuesday nights with shows. And we're going to be bringing you a lot of guests. We've got international guests going to be lining up, but we got a lot of content we want to bring you. And we want to thank the viewers for supporting us so far. Next show is going to be episode number 40.
Ooh, well, congratulations to all of us.
Yeah.
Especially Pete, who couldn't be bothered to hang out with us tonight.
Pete was feeling a little under the weather, so we'll give him a pass for tonight. We'll hope he'll be feeling better this week and start scheduling some guests when we return. We'll be back, and I want to say our shows will be on Tuesday nights. We'll be broadcasting those, and it looks like we'll be back. Let me give you an exact date, but it looks like it's going to be Tuesday, September the 27th will be when the show will return. So we're taking a few weeks off.
Well, and hopefully, you and Pete and myself, hopefully, maybe we can think of, there's something going on in Athens I can go investigate, because it is a very old, I think it's the oldest capital city in Europe.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get you doing some EVPs over there. We're going to do that. Yeah. We're going to get you that. And then Pete's going to set you up. We still got to get you a ghost box. So we got to work on that as well.
Sure. Well, I wonder if the ancient Greeks had ghost boxes.
They probably do. Yeah, they probably do. So if they did, they just leave them laying around for everybody to pick up. They do that with all the artifacts over there anyway.
Yeah, it's a free-for-all over there. They love it. It's a lot of rocks. Well, I heard someone say Athens is still under construction.
It's been under construction since what, the classical era? So.
Yeah, I think, about 2000 BC. So they're year 4000 of under construction.
Yeah. Well, Ike will be in Athens next time you see him, and we'll be back on the road beyond. Hey, you want to remind folks before we go on our little break about our social media, because we will be posting things, and hopefully maybe you can do some reports that we can post in social media.
That sounds like a good idea. I should do that. But you can find us on Facebook and this YouTube channel, The Road Beyond Podcast. You should subscribe to it, hit the notification bell so you know when we're doing our thing. We're also on Twitter, and we're on Todd's Instagram account. Yep. So follow us, and we'll keep doing it.
All right, folks, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Road Beyond Podcast. We'll be back with new episodes the week of September the 27th. Have a great couple of weeks. Stay safe out there. Our prayers go out to you, Louisiana, and we'll see you next time right here on the Road Beyond Podcast.